The afternoon sun beat down on the dusty playground of the neighborhood park, casting long, sharp shadows across the jungle gym. The relentless chirping of cicadas filled the humid summer air, a sound that would forever be etched into the memory of 4-year-old Izuku Midoriya. At 4 years old, the world was a simple place, divided neatly into two categories: those who had quirks, and those who did not. Izuku stood trembling near the edge of the sandbox, his small hands clenched into tight fists at his sides. His oversized red sneakers dug into the dirt, anchoring him to a spot he desperately wished he could run from. Ahead of him, beneath the sprawling branches of an ancient oak tree, stood Katsuki Bakugo. Katsuki, with his ash-blonde hair spiking in every direction, already carried himself with the swagger of a king. And why wouldn't he? Only weeks ago, his quirk had manifested. Small, crackling explosions popped like firecrackers in the palms of his hands, smelling sharply of burnt sugar and ozone. He was powerful. He was special. He was destined for greatness. But right now, he was being cruel. Behind Izuku cowered a small boy with tears streaming down his dirt-streaked face. The boy was clutching a bruised knee, having been shoved to the ground by Katsuki and his two lackeys. "That's mean, Kaken." Izuku's voice trembled, but he forced the words out. He took a hesitant step forward, throwing his arms out in a protective T-pose. "Can't you see he's crying? If you keep going, I'll stop you myself." Katsuki smirked, a vicious, feral expression that looked out of place on a child's face. He slammed his small fists together, a sharp pop crack echoing across the playground. A wisp of smoke curled from his knuckles. "You want to pretend to be a hero, Deku?" Katsuki sneered, taking a step forward. The two boys flanking him laughed, their voices high and mocking. "You don't even have a quirk yet. You're just a pebble in my way. Move, before I blast you too." Izuku's breath hitched. Fear, cold and paralyzing, gripped his small chest. His mind screamed at him to run, to apologize, to yield to Katsuki's overwhelming presence. But his legs refused to move. The boy behind him let out a small, terrified whimper. Izuku Midoriya wanted to be a hero like All Might. And All Might never ran away. "I have to save him," Izuku thought, squeezing his eyes shut. "I have to be strong." As Katsuki lunged forward, right hand raised and sparking with nascent, volatile energy, something inside Izuku snapped. It wasn't a breaking sound, but rather the heavy, ancient sound of a massive stone door being pushed open deep within his soul. The summer heat instantly vanished. The temperature in the park plummeted, plunging the immediate area into a sudden, biting chill. The chirping of the cicadas cut off abruptly, as if nature itself was holding its breath. Katsuki froze mid-stride, his crimson eyes widening. The sparks in his hand fizzled and died, snuffed out by a sudden, suffocating pressure that descended upon the playground. It felt as though gravity had doubled. The two lackeys behind Katsuki fell to their knees, gasping for air, clutching their chests as a wave of invisible, oppressive energy washed over them. Izuku opened his eyes. He didn't feel afraid anymore. He felt immense. Beneath Izuku's red shoes, his shadow began to boil. It didn't stretch from the sun, it expanded outward like a pool of spilled ink, defying the laws of light. The darkness churned, thick and viscous, bubbling with a strange, kinetic energy that hummed with a low, baritone vibration. What the heck is that?" Katsuki stammered, taking a step back. His typical bravado evaporated, replaced by primal, instinctual dread. From the boiling pool of shadow at Izuku's feet, a shape began to rise. First came two pointed, tufted ears, followed by a massive, lupin snout. The shadow coalesced, solidifying into matter that shouldn't exist. It was a wolf, but it was horrifyingly large, standing nearly as tall as an adult man at the shoulder. Its body was composed of dense, swirling, midnight blue and black kinetic energy. It didn't look like an animal of flesh and bone. It looked like a localized storm contained within the silhouette of an apex predator. The beast stepped entirely out of the shadow, its massive paws making no sound as they touched the dirt. It shook its mane, sending tendrils of dark, smoky energy drifting into the air. Then, it opened its eyes. They were glowing, radiant orbs of pure emerald green, the exact same shade as Izuku's eyes. Katsuki let out a breathless gasp, paralyzed. The wolf did not bark. It did not roar. It merely turned its massive head toward Katsuki and released a low, rumbling growl that vibrated the very air, rattling the metal chains of the nearby swings. Izuku stared at the magnificent creature in absolute awe. He didn't feel threatened by it. On the contrary, he felt a warm, golden tether connecting his mind to the beast's. He could feel its fierce, unwavering loyalty, its protective instinct, and its raw, untamed power. It felt like an extension of his own soul. Protect. Izuku whispered, the words slipping past his lips instinctively. The wolf moved with a speed that defied physics. It didn't run, it simply blurred. In a fraction of a second, the massive beast crossed the distance between them. Katsuki didn't even have time to scream. The wolf lunged, pinning the blond boy to the ground. It didn't use its teeth, nor did its claws pierce Katsuki's skin. Its massive front paws rested heavily on Katsuki's shoulders, pressing him firmly into the dust. The beast's snout was inches from Katsuki's face, its emerald eyes staring deeply into the bully's terrified crimson ones. The kinetic energy radiating off the wolf was palpable, static electricity causing the hairs on Katsuki's arms to stand up straight. It was a display of absolute, overwhelming dominance. It was a clear message: do not touch him. Katsuki lay perfectly still, his chest heaving, his eyes locked onto the glowing green orbs of the monster above him. He wasn't hurt, but the sheer, insurmountable gap in their power had been made painfully clear in a single second. Izuku took a step forward, the oppressive aura hanging over the playground lightening slightly. Kaken, are you okay? Before Katsuki could answer, a panicked voice broke the silence. Izuku! Oh my goodness, Izuku! Inko Midoriya came sprinting into the park, grocery bags dropped and forgotten on the sidewalk. Her eyes were wide with terror as she took in the scene, 2 children on the ground, Katsuki pinned, and her sweet, timid son standing beside a monstrous beast made of living shadow. At the sound of Inko's voice, the wolf turned its head. It looked at Izuku, receiving an unspoken, unconscious command. The beast stepped off Katsuki. It trotted over to Izuku and, to Inko's absolute shock, nudged its massive, terrifying head against Izuku's small chest. Izuku giggled, reaching his tiny hands up to pet the dense, smoky fur. It felt like running his hands through thick, warm silk that hummed with electricity. Mom! Izuku beamed, his face lighting up with pure, unadulterated joy. The dark aura completely vanished, replaced by the innocent sunshine of a 4-year-old boy. Look! I got my quirk! I'm a hero! As Katsuki slowly picked himself up from the dirt, dusting off his shorts, he stared at Izuku. The irritation, the superiority, the arrogance, it was all washed away by the sheer magnitude of what he had just witnessed. He looked at his own palms, then back at the colossal shadow wolf panting happily beside the green-haired boy. The world had just shifted on its axis. Fascinating. Utterly, completely fascinating. Dr. Tsubasa adjusted his thick, round spectacles, leaning closer to the clipboard in his hands. The clinical white walls of the Quirk examination room were bathed in the fluorescent lights, but the corners of the room seemed inexplicably darker, as if the shadows were being drawn toward the small boy sitting on the examination table. Izuku sat swinging his legs, a massive, goofy grin plastered across his face. Beside him, Inko sat in a plastic chair, twisting a tissue nervously between her fingers. Sitting faithfully at the base of the examination table was the wolf. In the sterile light of the clinic, the creature was even more majestic. It wasn't completely opaque. One could see the swirling vortexes of dark, kinetic energy moving beneath its skin. Well, Mrs. Midoriya, Dr. Tsubasa began, clicking his pen. I can say with absolute certainty that your son is not quirkless. In fact, he possesses an incredibly rare and powerful mutation emitter hybrid. A hybrid? Inko asked, leaning forward, her maternal anxiety warring with immense pride. Yes, the doctor nodded, turning to look at Izuku. Open your mouth, Izuku. Show me your teeth. Izuku obliged, opening wide. Dr. Tsubasa pointed a small penlight inside. As you can see, his canines have sharpened significantly, resembling those of a predatory animal. Furthermore, his auditory tests show that his hearing is already operating at a frequency far beyond normal human capability. He can hear the hum of the electricity in these walls. These are passive, physical mutations. Dr. Tsubasa turned his attention back to the clipboard. However, the primary manifestation is an emitter-type ability. Izuku, can you try to do what I asked you to do earlier? Try to bring out more. Izuku nodded seriously. He closed his eyes and concentrated. He remembered the feeling in the park, the deep, pulling sensation in his chest. He focused on the shadows cast by the examination table. Come out, he thought. I need you. The temperature in the room plummeted. Inko shivered, wrapping her arms around herself. The shadow beneath the table bubbled and expanded. From the darkness, two more figures emerged. They were smaller than the first wolf, about the size of large German shepherds, but they were composed of the exact same swirling, dark kinetic energy. They shook themselves off, their emerald eyes glowing brightly, and immediately trotted over to sniff Dr. Tsubasa's shoes before sitting obediently at Izuku's feet. Incredible, the doctor whispered, scribbling furiously on his pad. 3 independent constructs. And you feel no physical strain, Izuku? Nope. Izuku chirped. I can hear what they hear, though. And smell what they smell. It's like I have 4 bodies. Dr. Tsubasa looked at Inko. The creatures are semi-sentient constructs formed from dense, shadowy kinetic energy. They share a sensory link with your son. Essentially, he is the central hub, the alpha of this pack. But what is truly astonishing is their structural integrity. The doctor walked over to a metal cabinet and pulled out a small, specialized laser scalpel used for testing the durability of defensive quirks. May I? He asked Izuku. Izuku nodded, patting the head of the largest wolf. Fenrir says it's okay. You named him Fenrir? Apt, the doctor muttered. He activated the scalpel, producing a low-heat, concentrated beam. He pressed it against the shoulder of the massive beast. The beam passed right through the kinetic energy, causing the smoke to part and swirl around it. The wolf didn't flinch. It just looked at the doctor with mild amusement. Fascinating. They are not flesh and blood. They are pure energy. You cannot kill them through conventional means, Dr. Tsubasa concluded, turning off the tool. If they take enough concussive damage to break their form, they will likely just dissipate into energy and return to Izuku's shadow. They are, for all intents and purposes, unstoppable forces of nature. As long as Izuku has the stamina to sustain them, they will persist. Inko put a hand over her mouth, tears welling in her eyes. My baby, he has such an amazing power. There is one more thing, Dr. Tsubasa said, his tone growing slightly more serious. When Izuku first manifested this quirk to protect the other boy, you mentioned Katsuki Bakugo and his friends fell to their knees. And the temperature dropped? Yes, Inko nodded. It felt so heavy. Like it was hard to breathe. I theorized that Izuku naturally emits a localized, psychological pressure wave. Let's call it an alpha aura. It is a survival mechanism, designed to intimidate threats and establish dominance without shedding blood. It affects the nervous system of those who perceive him as a threat. Dr. Tsubasa smiled kindly at Izuku. It is a power befitting a true leader. A power meant to pacify, not to kill. The doctor stamped a red seal onto a manila folder. For official registry, I am classifying this quirk as Apex Legion. Izuku looked down at Fenrir, and the 2 smaller wolves flanking his legs. He reached down, burying his hands into their dark, swirling manes. He felt a profound sense of completeness. Apex Legion, he thought. I'm going to use this power to save everyone with a smile. The return to preschool the following week was nothing short of a paradigm shift. Before the awakening of Apex Legion, Izuku was just another kid. He was sweet, prone to muttering, and obsessed with all might. He was a follower, usually trailing 5 steps behind Katsuki's explosive wake. Now, Izuku Midoriya was the sun around which the playground orbited. It was impossible to ignore him. Even when his wolves were tucked away in his shadow, there was a noticeable change in the boy. He stood a little taller. The sharpness of his canines gave his smiles a faintly wild edge. And then there was the aura. Even suppressed, a low-level hum of confidence radiated from him, an instinctual gravity that drew other children toward him. When playtime started, a crowd gathered around Izuku. Midoriya, let us see them. Please! A boy with elongating fingers begged. Izuku, beaming, obliged. He stepped into the shade of the oak tree and focused. The shadows rippled, and Fenrir stepped out, followed by the two smaller wolves. The preschool erupted into gasps of awe and cheers. Izuku allowed the kids to pet the smaller wolves, who eagerly accepted the belly rubs, their kinetic tails wagging and kicking up small breezes of chilled air. From the top of the jungle gym, Katsuki Bakugo watched. His red eyes were narrowed, his fists clenched tightly at his sides. For a week, he had thought about nothing else but the massive beast that had pinned him to the dirt. He remembered the feeling of absolute helplessness. He remembered the suffocating weight of Izuku's aura. In a lesser boy, this might have bred resentment, jealousy, or bitter bullying. It would have been easy for Katsuki to hate Izuku, to try and tear him down with cruel words to make up for the gap in physical power. But Katsuki Bakugo was not a lesser boy. He was defined by an unyielding, ferocious pride. To bully Izuku now would be admitting weakness. It would be acting like a frightened prey animal barking at a predator. Katsuki refused to be prey. He slid down the fireman's pole of the jungle gym and marched straight through the crowd of fawning children. The sea of kids parted for him, sensing his intense mood. Katsuki stopped 3 feet from Izuku. Fenrir immediately stood up from where he was resting, his emerald eyes locking onto Katsuki. The massive wolf let out a low, warning rumble. "It's okay, Fenrir." "Down," Izuku said softly, placing a hand on the beast's snout. The wolf instantly quieted and sat, though his eyes never left the blond boy. Izuku looked at Katsuki, his expression open and friendly. "Hi, Kaken." Katsuki didn't yell. He didn't spark his explosions. He looked at the wolves, then looked Izuku dead in the eye. "Your quirk is strong, Deku," Katsuki said, his voice surprisingly steady for a 4-year-old. He raised his hands, letting a series of sharp, bright explosions crackle across his palms. "But I'm not gonna lose to you. My explosions are gonna get so big and so hot, they'll blow your stupid shadows away. I'm gonna be the #1 hero, and I'll beat your whole pack to do it." It wasn't a threat of violence. It was a declaration of war. A formal challenge from a rival. Izuku stared at Katsuki for a moment. Then, his sharpened canines flashed in a wide, genuine smile. The alpha aura flared slightly, not oppressive, but invigorating, a wave of competitive heat. "You can try, Kaken," Izuku replied brightly. "But my pack and I are gonna be #1. We'll save everyone, even you," Katsuki scoffed, shoving his hands into his pockets. "As if I'd ever need your help, you damn nerd." He turned and walked away, but the heavy tension in his shoulders was gone. A fire had been lit in Katsuki Bakugo's chest, a desperate, driving need to surpass the boy with the unstoppable pack. The bullying stopped that day. The rivalry began. Age 7, the years passed, and Izuku grew to understand the true nature of Apex Legion. It was a rainy Tuesday afternoon. Izuku was walking home from elementary school, holding a bright yellow umbrella. Splashing in the puddles beside him were 2 of his wolves. He had learned to manipulate their size, keeping them roughly the size of golden retrievers for casual walks so as not to scare the neighbors. Suddenly, a small tortoiseshell cat darted out from an alleyway, completely panicked. It sprinted straight into the busy street, right into the path of a speeding delivery truck that was skidding on the wet asphalt. Izuku didn't even have to speak. The sensory link was instantaneous. One of his wolves blurred into motion. It shot forward like a dark torpedo, intersecting the truck's path. The wolf grabbed the cat gently by the scruff of its neck in its massive jaws and leaped backward. However, the truck was too fast. Its front bumper slammed violently into the wolf's hindquarters with a sickening thud. Izuku gasped, dropping his umbrella. The impact sent the wolf flying into a brick wall. But instead of blood and broken bones, the wolf simply shattered upon impact. It burst into a massive cloud of midnight blue smoke and crackling kinetic energy, dissipating into the rainy air instantly. The cat, completely unharmed, dropped safely onto the sidewalk. The truck driver slammed on his brakes, jumping out of the cab in a panic. "Oh my God! I hit a dog. I'm so sorry." Izuku ran forward, picking up the shivering cat. He wasn't crying. He felt a strange pulling sensation in his chest, a sudden drain on his physical stamina, like he had just sprinted a 100-meter dash. He looked down at his shadow. It was boiling. Less than 5 seconds after the wolf had been destroyed, the darkness erupted. The wolf reformed at Izuku's feet, completely pristine, its kinetic energy swirling as calmly as ever. It shook its mane, completely unfazed by the fact that it had just been hit by a 3-ton vehicle, and gently licked the terrified cat in Izuku's arms. The truck driver rubbed his eyes, gaping at the beast. What just? It's my Quirk, sir. He's okay. Izuku called out, smiling apologetically. As Izuku walked away, holding the cat, a profound realization settled over him. Dr. Tsubasa had been right. His wolves couldn't die. If they sustained critical damage, their physical form broke, and the energy snapped back to the alpha to be redeployed. The only cost was a chunk of Izuku's physical stamina to summon them back. As long as I can stand, Izuku realized, clenching his free hand into a fist, my pack can fight. They really are unstoppable. Age 10. By the time Izuku reached his final years of elementary school, he and his wolves were a fixture of his neighborhood in Mizutafu. He was known affectionately by the locals as the Shadow Guardian. Izuku rarely kept his quirk deactivated. He usually had at least one wolf roaming within a half-mile radius of him at all times, acting as an extra set of eyes and ears. His sensory link had evolved dramatically. Initially, having multiple perspectives had caused blinding headaches. If Fenrir was looking down an alleyway while another wolf was staring up at a tree, and Izuku was trying to read a textbook, his brain would short-circuit from the sensory overload. To combat this, Izuku developed an intense meditation regimen. He trained his mind to compartmentalize. He learned to relegate the wolf's vision to his peripheral consciousness, like having multiple security camera feeds playing softly in the back of his mind. He only brought them to the forefront when an anomaly was detected, and anomalies were detected often. Izuku used his wolves for everything. A grandmother dropped her keys in a storm drain? A scout wolf, shifting its form to become sleek and ferret-like, dove in and retrieved them. A toddler wandered away from their mother at the park? Fenrir, tracking the scent perfectly, found the child in minutes and stood guard until help arrived. Izuku's heroic heart was on full display. He didn't seek praise or money. He genuinely loved helping people. He spent his afternoons analyzing pro-heroes in his notebooks, hero analysis for the future, but he also spent hours running through the woods near his apartment, testing his physical limits, bounding alongside his pack. He realized early on that his quirk was intrinsically tied to his physical fitness. The more stamina he had, the more wolves he could summon, and the faster they could reform if destroyed. He began doing push-ups, sit-ups, and running miles every day. By age 10, underneath his oversized shirts, Izuku was developing a lean, wiry musculature that was highly unusual for his age. Katsuki noticed. Their dynamic had crystallized into a fierce, unspoken respect masked by loud bickering. Katsuki was explosive, loud, and aggressively brilliant. Izuku was calm, observant, and possessed an aura that demanded quiet authority. One afternoon behind the school, Katsuki cornered Izuku. "Hey, Deku," Katsuki snapped, tossing a baseball up and down. "Fight me." Izuku blinked, surrounded by 3 of his wolves who were currently napping in the sun. "Kaken, we're 10. The teachers will get mad." "Shut up. I've been practicing a new move," Katsuki growled, small explosions popping on the baseball. "I need to see if it can break through that big one's defense." "Call out the big one." "Fenrir." Izuku sighed, but a competitive spark lit up his emerald eyes. He stood up, cracking his knuckles. The 3 smaller wolves dissolved into smoke, returning to his shadow. Izuku took a deep breath, dipping into his reserves. The shadow exploded. Fenrir emerged, standing a full 6 feet tall at the shoulder, a monstrous tempest of midnight energy. The wolf bared its teeth at Katsuki, a terrifying, silent snarl. "Bring it on, Kaken," Izuku said, his voice dropping an octave as the alpha aura bled into the air, making the grass around them flatten. Katsuki grinned like a maniac and launched himself forward, hands blazing with fire. "Die!" The ensuing clash shook the schoolyard. Katsuki unleashed a massive, 2-handed explosion directly at Fenrir's chest. The concussive blast was deafening, scorching the earth. For a brief second, Fenrir's kinetic form wavered, the smoke blowing backward violently. But the beast did not break. Fenrir leaned into the explosion, absorbing the kinetic force of Katsuki's blast, and swiped a massive paw forward. It didn't strike Katsuki with claws, it hit him with the flat, dense padding of its paw. The blow launched Katsuki 10 feet through the air, sending him tumbling into the grass. Katsuki groaned, sitting up and rubbing his bruised ribs. He looked at Fenrir, who was completely unfazed, already reforming the slight dent in his smoky chest. Damn it, Katsuki spat, though there was no real malice in his voice. Still not enough firepower. Izuku walked over, offering Katsuki a hand. The blonde swatted it away and stood up on his own, glaring at Izuku. I'll get it next time, Deku. You better not slack off, or I'm gonna leave you in the dust. Izuku smiled, his pointed canines glinting. I won't, Kaken. I promise. Age 14. The classroom of Aldera Junior High was a cacophony of bored teenagers and rustling papers. Izuku sat near the window, his chin resting in his hand as he stared outside. He looked completely different from the timid 4-year-old on the playground. At 14, Izuku Midoriya was a striking figure. He was tall for his age, with broad shoulders hidden beneath his black Gakurin uniform. His messy green hair was styled a bit wilder, and his emerald eyes held a sharp, piercing intelligence. He naturally exuded a quiet, commanding presence. When Izuku walked down the hallway, the crowds parted unconsciously. It wasn't out of fear. Izuku was notoriously polite and kind, but his alpha aura had matured. It was a subliminal pressure that demanded respect. Under his desk, mostly obscured by shadows, a small, obsidian black wolf pup was curled around his ankles, silently chewing on a spare pencil. Since you're all third years, it's time for you to think seriously about your futures, the homeroom teacher announced, standing at the podium holding a stack of career aptitude forms. He dramatically tossed the papers into the air. But who am I kidding? You're all planning to go into the hero course, right? The classroom erupted into cheers as students activated their quirks, showing off minor levitation, rock-hard skin, and water manipulation. Yes, you all have wonderful quirks, the teacher chuckled. But remember, using them in school is against the rules. Hey, teach! A loud, arrogant voice cut through the noise. Katsuki Bakugo kicked his feet up onto his desk, leaning back in his chair. Don't lump me in with these background characters. I'm not going to some bottom-tier agency. I'm aiming for the top. The class instantly started murmuring, half annoyed, half intimidated. Ah, Bakugo, you're aiming for UA High, right? The teacher asked, adjusting his glasses. Gasps filled the room. UA? The national school? The acceptance rate is like 0.2%. That's exactly why it's the only place for me. Katsuki declared, slamming his hand on the desk, a small explosion cracking. I aced the mock exams. I'm the only one here with the power, the drive, and the raw talent to make it to the big leagues. I'm gonna surpass All Might and become the undisputed number one. Oh, right, the teacher glanced down at his clipboard, his eyes scanning the page. Midoriya, you're also applying for UA, aren't you? The classroom instantly fell dead silent. All eyes turned to the green-haired boy sitting by the window. Nobody laughed. Nobody mocked him. In this reality, the idea of Izuku Midoriya applying to UA was not a joke. It was a foregone conclusion. Izuku slowly turned his gaze from the window to the front of the room. He didn't brag. He didn't shout. He simply gave a calm, measured nod. Yes, sir, Izuku said, his voice smooth and steady. Katsuki turned around in his seat, his crimson eyes locking onto Izuku's emerald ones. The tension in the room skyrocketed. The air grew perceptibly colder as Izuku's aura unconsciously flared to meet Katsuki's aggressive stare. The small wolf pup under Izuku's desk stopped chewing the pencil and let out a soft, warning growl. You better not fail the entrance exam, Deku, Katsuki said, his voice dangerously low. Because I'm going to prove that my explosions are the ultimate power on that campus. I'm going to dismantle your entire pack. Izuku offered a small, challenging smile. He leaned forward slightly, resting his elbows on his desk. I currently have a sustained summoning limit of 15 wolves, Kaken, Izuku replied evenly. And my sensory integration is flawless. If you want to dismantle the pack, you'll have to get through me first. Katsuki smirked, a vicious, feral grin. Looking forward to it, Alpha. The bell rang, shattering the heavy tension in the room. The students let out collective breaths they didn't realize they were holding and began packing up their bags. Izuku stood up, grabbing his yellow backpack. He slipped his latest notebook, Hero Analysis for the Future, Volume 13, into the main pocket. The small wolf pup at his feet dissolved into shadow, sinking back into Izuku's silhouette. As he walked out of the school gates, heading toward the underpass that led to his neighborhood, Izuku pulled out his phone to check the hero news. There were reports of a villain made of sludge causing chaos a few blocks away. Izuku didn't alter his route. He merely flexed his hands, feeling the deep, thrumming reservoir of kinetic energy resting within his soul. He closed his eyes, extending his sensory net outward. A mile away, 2 invisible scout wolves, prowling the rooftops, relayed a live feed of the city streets directly into his cerebral cortex. He could see the panicked civilians. He could hear the sirens. He could smell the rancid stench of sewage. Izuku Midoriya opened his eyes, his sharpened canines gleaming as a confident smile spread across his face. He stepped into the dark shadows of the underpass, his silhouette elongating, boiling with untamed, monstrous power. The Alpha was ready to hunt. The acrid scent of burning plastic and ozone hung heavy in the afternoon air. Plumes of thick, black smoke billowed into the sky, casting an unnatural twilight over the Tatooine shopping district. Sirens wailed in a dissonant chorus, their flashing red and blue lights reflecting off the shattered glass of storefronts. Izuku Midoriya stood at the edge of the police barricade, his emerald eyes locked onto the epicenter of the chaos. He hadn't been in the shopping district when the attack began. He had been a mile away, walking home from Aldera Junior High, lost in thought about UA High's upcoming entrance exams. But his scout wolves, 2 small, agile constructs of shadow he kept prowling the rooftops to act as his extended senses, had immediately fed him the sensory data. He had felt the heat of the fire's phantom singeing his skin. He had heard the muffled, desperate explosions. And he had recognized the scent of the explosive sweat instantly. Kaken. Now, standing behind the yellow tape, Izuku took in the dire situation. A massive, amorphous villain made entirely of foul-smelling, greenish-brown sludge had taken over the alleyway. The sludge was expanding, thrashing wildly, tearing down signs and knocking over utility poles. The fires that raged around the villain were a direct result of the captive trapped within the sludge's gelatinous body. Katsuki Bakugo was completely engulfed, only his face occasionally surfacing from the muck as he gasped for air. His eyes were wide with a rare, suffocating terror, his hands blindly firing off massive explosions in a desperate bid for freedom. But the blasts only fueled the surrounding fires and did nothing to dislodge the fluid villain. The pro-heroes on the scene were paralyzed. Kamui Woods couldn't get close because of the fire. Empty Lady didn't have the space to expand in the narrow 2-lane street. Death Arms had tried to punch the villain, only to get his arms stuck in the viscous mud. "It's no use," Death Arms shouted, coughing on the smoke. "None of our quirks are suited for this. We have to wait for someone with a favorable quirk, but the kid won't last that long." Kamui Woods yelled back, shielding his face from an errant explosion. "He's suffocating." In the crowd, hidden among the terrified onlookers, a skeletal, blonde-haired man clutched his side. Tashinori Yagi, the legendary symbol of peace, All Might, gritted his teeth in agony. His time limit had run out. He was out of power, reduced to a pathetic bystander. Pathetic, he thought, blood dribbling from his mouth. "I'm pathetic. I let this monster escape, and now a child is paying the price." All Might looked at the pro-heroes, waiting for someone, anyone, to make a move. Instead, it was a 14-year-old boy in a black school uniform. Izuku didn't think. He didn't weigh the legal ramifications of unauthorized quirk use. He didn't consider the danger. His body moved entirely on its own, driven by a primal, heroic instinct that eclipsed logic. He slipped under the yellow police tape and broke into a sprint. "Hey! Kid! Stop! Are you crazy?" Death Arms bellowed, reaching out to grab Izuku's shoulder. Izuku didn't even look back. He merely flared his aura. The air pressure in the street suddenly dropped. A heavy, suffocating weight, far more oppressive than the smoke, slammed into Death Arms, freezing the pro-hero in his tracks. The hair on the back of the hero's neck stood on end. For a fraction of a second, Death Arms didn't see a middle school student. He saw the silhouette of a towering, apex predator warning him to stay out of its hunting grounds. Izuku skidded to a halt 10 meters from the sludge villain. The heat of the fire licked at his face, but he paid it no mind. He locked eyes with Katsuki. Deku. Katsuki managed to gurgle before the sludge forced its way over his mouth again. You little brat! The sludge villain roared, a massive, watery eye swiveling to glare at Izuku. You want to be a hero too? I'll add you to the pile. A thick tendril of sludge whipped forward, aiming to crush Izuku against the pavement. Izuku took a deep breath, his hands naturally curling into loose fists. He reached deep into the wellspring of kinetic energy resting in his core. Hunt, Izuku commanded, his voice cold, calm, and carrying an echoing, baritone resonance. His shadow erupted. It wasn't just one wolf this time. A localized geyser of midnight blue and black energy exploded upward from the asphalt. 5 wolves leaped from the darkness, but these were not the standard, dense, heavily furred beasts like Fenrir. Izuku had intentionally altered their kinetic structure. They were sleek, almost liquid in their appearance, their bodies vibrating at a frequency that blurred their edges. They were phase-shift wolves, adapted for aquatic and fluid environments. The crowd gasped. The pro-heroes stared in stunned silence. All Might's hollowed eyes widened in shock. The sludge tendril slammed down, but the 5 wolves blurred out of the way with impossible, supernatural speed. They didn't run, they glided across the pavement like drops of water on a hot skillet. What the hell are these things? The sludge villain shrieked, swinging wildly. The wolves didn't bite at the outside of the sludge. They possessed no lungs, they did not breathe. They were pure, unstoppably persistent energy. Moving in perfect, synchronized harmony, all 5 wolves leaped directly into the villain's gelatinous mass. The sludge villain let out a horrific, bubbling scream. Inside the murky, foul-smelling liquid, the 5 glowing emerald eyes of the wolves illuminated the darkness. They began to tear the villain apart from the inside out. They spun like kinetic torpedoes, churning the sludge, creating massive air pockets. The villain's fluid structure was entirely disrupted. It could no longer maintain a cohesive grip on Katsuki. Izuku felt the strain. Controlling the wolves inside an actively hostile, shifting environment required immense concentration and a rapid burn of his physical stamina. Sweat beaded on his forehead, but he didn't waver. Kaken! Now! Izuku roared over the roar of the flames, taking a step forward. Inside the villain, Katsuki suddenly found himself in a pocket of air, the oppressive weight of the sludge violently torn away by one of Izuku's shadow beasts. Katsuki gasped, his lungs filling with precious oxygen. His crimson eyes locked onto the glowing green eyes of the wolf beside him, and he understood. Katsuki raised both hands, sparking with the largest reserve of sweat he had managed to build up. Die! A massive, blinding explosion detonated from within the sludge villain. Because the wolves had already compromised the villain's structural integrity, the explosion tore the monster to shreds. Greasy rain showered over the alleyway as the villain was blown into thousands of harmless globs. Katsuki fell forward, coughing violently, gasping for air on the scorched pavement. Before the pro-heroes could even react, Izuku was already there. He knelt beside his rival, his 5 wolves phasing out of the falling sludge and taking up a protective, circular perimeter around the 2 boys. The wolves growled low, keeping the flames at bay with the sheer kinetic wind of their presence. You okay, Kaken? Izuku asked, his voice returning to its normal, gentle pitch. Katsuki coughed, spitting a wad of foul-tasting mud onto the ground. He glared up at Izuku, his pride bruised but his life saved. I didn't need your damn help, Deku. I had it under control. Izuku smiled softly, his pointed canines showing. I know. But my legs moved on their own. In the crowd, Toshinori Yagi stood absolutely paralyzed. His legs moved on their own. That was the core tenet of every great hero in history. Before they could think, before they could strategize, their bodies moved to save a life. This boy, this teenager with an overwhelmingly powerful, terrifyingly dominant quirk, possessed the pure, unadulterated heart of a true hero. As the fires were extinguished and the police rushed in to gather the scattered remains of the sludge villain, the aftermath was a whirlwind. The pro-heroes immediately cornered Izuku. Death Arms was furious, lecturing the boy on the dangers of vigilantism and unauthorized quirk usage. However, Kamui Woods and Empty Lady couldn't hide their awe. That was incredibly reckless, kid, Death Arms scolded, pointing a stern finger. You could have been killed. With all due respect, sir, Izuku replied politely, bowing his head slightly, though the two massive shadow wolves flanking him made the bow look less like an apology, and more like a formality from a king. My pack is immune to asphyxiation and kinetic trauma. They were the perfect counter to a fluid-based enemy. If I had waited, Kaken would have suffered permanent brain damage from lack of oxygen. Death Arms opened his mouth to argue, then closed it, realizing the boy was entirely right. The tactical assessment was flawless. Nearby, other heroes were praising Katsuki for his resilience and the power of his explosions, but Katsuki wasn't listening. He was watching Izuku. The gap between them, which Katsuki swore he was closing, had just been ripped wide open again. Izuku hadn't even engaged in combat himself. He had orchestrated a flawless rescue without taking a single scratch. The sun began to set, casting long orange rays across the city. Izuku was finally allowed to leave, walking home alone through a quiet residential street. His stamina was drained. He felt an ache in his muscles, a testament to the heavy toll of precise pack manipulation. I am here! Izuku jumped, spinning around. Stepping out from an alleyway, completely out of nowhere, was All Might. The number one hero was in his muscular, towering form, striking a dynamic pose. All Might? Izuku gasped, his eyes shining with pure fan adoration. The stoic, commanding alpha demeanor vanished entirely, replaced by a stuttering, starstruck teenager. What are you doing here? I saw you drop the bottles earlier, but I didn't know you were still in the area. All Might coughed, a small spray of blood escaping his lips, before a cloud of steam engulfed him. In an instant, the muscular giant was replaced by the skeletal Tashinori Yagi. Izuku blinked, his jaw dropping. Eh? You deflated. Tashinori wiped his mouth, sighing heavily. He proceeded to explain his injury, the limit of his power, and the reality of his declining state. Izuku listened in stunned silence, his brilliant mind processing the catastrophic implications for society if the symbol of peace were to fall. I came here to thank you, young man, and to apologize, Tashinori said, his hollow eyes meeting Izuku's emerald ones. If you hadn't rushed into that fire, I would have let a young boy die because of my own weakness and hesitation. No! Izuku protested immediately. You're All Might. You've saved thousands of people. You were at your limit. I had the right quirk for the job. Tashinori smiled, a genuine, warm expression. Humility. Another excellent trait. Young man, when I saw you rush forward, you reminded me of what it truly means to be a hero. It is not just about powerful quirks or flashy moves. It is about the instinct to protect. Tashinori stepped closer, looking down at the boy's shadow, which seemed to ripple even in the fading light. Your quirk, it is formidable. Terrifying, even, to those who do not understand it. A lesser man might have used it to dominate others, to become a villain. But you use it to shield the weak. Tashinori placed a skeletal hand on Izuku's shoulder. I do not know what the future holds, young man. But looking at you today, I know society will be safe. You have the heart of a savior, and the power of an army. I look forward to seeing you at UA High. Izuku's eyes welled with tears. The number one hero, his idol, had just validated his entire existence. Izuku bowed deeply, his voice trembling with emotion. Thank you, All Might. I promise, I won't let you down. The 10 months of training. That night, sitting at his desk illuminated by a single lamp, Izuku stared at his open notebook. Hero Analysis for the Future, Volume 13. The page was dedicated entirely to himself. Quirk, Apex Legion. Current sustained pack limit, 15 wolves. Current maximum pack limit, burst 18 wolves. Izuku chewed on the end of his pen. The sludge villain incident had been a wake-up call. Yes, he had saved Kaken. But what if there had been 20 people trapped? What if a building had collapsed? His wolves were invincible, but they could only be in one place at a time. 15 wolves were not an army. If he wanted to be the #1 hero, if he wanted to ensure that nobody ever died on his watch, he needed to break his limits. Dr. Tsubasa had explained it years ago. The limit to the pack was Izuku's physical stamina. The wolves were manifestations of his own life force and kinetic energy. To summon more, to maintain them longer, he didn't need to practice summoning. He needed to turn his physical body into an unbreakable vessel. The next morning, Izuku stood at the edge of Dagoba Municipal Beach Park. It wasn't a beach. It was an illegal dumping ground. Mountains of rusted refrigerators, broken trucks, and shattered electronics obscured the ocean view. Izuku took a deep breath, smelling the salt and rust. He cracked his knuckles. "All right, pack," Izuku murmured. His shadow expanded, and 15 wolves materialized onto the sand. They looked up at him, their emerald eyes glowing with anticipation. "We have 10 months until the UA entrance exam. We're going to clean this entire beach. But there's a rule." The wolves tilted their heads. "You guys can carry the small stuff. The heavy lifting? That's all me." And so began a grueling, 10-month crusade of physical torment. Every morning before school, and every evening until his muscles screamed in agony, Izuku hauled garbage. He strapped heavy ropes around his waist and dragged tires through the deep sand. He lifted rusted washing machines on his back. But Izuku didn't stop at raw physical labor. He needed to evolve his quirk usage. 3 months into the training, under the light of a full moon, Izuku stood amidst a cleared patch of sand. He recalled all his wolves into his shadow. He was panting, completely exhausted, his muscles trembling. "If they are my energy," Izuku thought, closing his eyes, "and they return to me, what happens if I pull them into my physical muscles instead of letting them rest in my shadow?" "Fenrir," Izuku commanded softly. The massive alpha wolf stepped out of the shadow. "Come here." Fenrir approached. Izuku reached out, placing his hand flat against the wolf's dense, kinetic chest. "Pack integration," Izuku whispered, attempting a technique he had only theorized in his notebooks. "Sink." Fenrir didn't dissipate. Instead, the massive wolf collapsed inward, shifting from a solid construct into a raging torrent of midnight blue kinetic smoke. The smoke spiraled up Izuku's arm, sinking directly into his skin. Izuku screamed. It felt as though a lightning bolt had been injected directly into his veins. The raw, untamed kinetic energy of the massive beast flooded his muscular and nervous systems. Izuku fell to his knees in the sand, clutching his chest as his heart rate skyrocketed. The power was intoxicating, but the physical strain was astronomical. His eyes snapped open. They weren't just green. They were glowing like miniature suns, identical to the wolf's eyes. His canines elongated further, pressing painfully against his bottom lip. Midnight blue kinetic energy sparked and crackled off his skin like static electricity. He looked at an old, rusted pickup truck 10 yards away. Izuku pushed off the sand. He didn't run, he vanished. The kinetic force of his legs launching him forward created a shockwave that blasted the sand into the air. He crossed the distance in a millisecond, his fist slamming into the side of the truck. The metal didn't just dent, it completely folded. The multi-ton vehicle was sent flying across the beach, crashing into the ocean with a massive splash. Izuku stumbled back, the energy violently ripping itself out of his body. Fenrir materialized next to him, panting heavily, as Izuku collapsed onto the sand, gasping for air. Every muscle fiber in his body felt like it had been set on fire. "So that's pack integration." Izuku wheezed, a tired but triumphant grin spreading across his face. "It grants me their physical attributes, their speed, their strength. But my body has to be the container. If I'm not strong enough, it'll tear me apart." For the next 7 months, Izuku pushed himself beyond the limits of human endurance. He trained his body to withstand the explosive feedback of pack integration. He forced his stamina reserves to deepen, day by agonizing day. His diet became strictly regulated. His sleep schedules were perfectly optimized. By the time the 10 months were up, Dagoba Beach was pristine, the rising sun reflecting off the sparkling blue ocean waves. Standing on the seawall, looking out at the horizon, Izuku Midoriya was completely transformed. At 15 years old, he was a specimen of peak athletic perfection. Beneath his plain white t-shirt, his torso was chiseled with dense, highly functional muscle, lightly scarred by the kinetic burns of his integration training. His posture was impeccable. The alpha aura he emitted was no longer wild or accidental. It was a perfectly controlled, majestic presence. He closed his eyes and checked his internal registry. Current sustained pack limit, 30 wolves. Izuku opened his eyes, letting out a breath that materialized as a faint wisp of dark energy. Let's go hunt. The UA entrance exam. The towering gates of UA High School loomed like a fortress of dreams. Hundreds of aspiring heroes milled about the courtyard, their faces a mix of excitement and terror. Izuku walked through the gates with a calm, measured stride. He wore his black school uniform, his green hair catching the morning sun. He didn't look nervous. He looked exactly like someone who belonged there. Out of my way, Deku! Izuku glanced over his shoulder. Katsuki Bakugo was stomping toward him, a fierce scowl on his face. Katsuki had also clearly bulked up over the last 10 months, his shoulders broader, his posture aggressive. Good morning, Kaken, Izuku said warmly, stepping aside to let the blonde pass. Don't think you're gonna show me up today, Katsuki snarled, stopping right next to Izuku. I'm going to get the highest score in the history of this damn school. Keep your mutts out of my way. We're in different testing centers, Kaken, Izuku replied gently. But good luck. I know you'll do amazing. Katsuki clicked his tongue in irritation, unable to pick a fight with Izuku's unwavering politeness, and stomped off toward the auditorium. As Izuku turned to continue walking, his enhanced hearing caught the sound of a sharp intake of breath, followed by the scuff of a shoe. He didn't even turn around. His shadow flickered. A round-faced girl with short brown hair had tripped over a paving stone. She braced for a painful impact with the concrete, her eyes squeezed shut tightly. But the impact never came. Instead, she landed on something impossibly soft, dense, and slightly cold. She opened her eyes. A shadowy construct, shaped like a large dog, had instantly materialized beneath her, catching her gently on its back. The creature was made of swirling, midnight blue smoke, its emerald eyes blinking up at her warmly. Whoa! The girl gasped, righting herself as the shadow pup wagged its tail, creating a small breeze. Careful there, a smooth, baritone voice called out. The girl looked up. Standing a few feet away was a tall, handsome boy with wild green eyes. He smiled at her, his slightly pointed teeth giving him a roguish but kind appearance. He snapped his fingers softly, and the shadow pup dissolved into mist, flowing rapidly across the concrete to merge back into the boy's shadow. Are you all right? Izuku asked. I am fine, the girl stammered, her face flushing slightly as she realized how close she had come to eating concrete. Thank you? That was an amazing quirk. I was going to use mine to float, but I panicked. I'm Ochiko Uraraka, Izuku Midoriya. It's nice to meet you, Uraraka. Let's both do our best today. Izuku offered a small wave before heading into the auditorium. Uraraka watched him go, feeling a strange sense of calm wash over her. He's so cool, she thought. Inside the massive auditorium, the voice hero, Present Mike, was delivering an aggressively loud orientation regarding the practical exam. Izuku sat quietly, analyzing the rules. 10 minutes. An urban cityscape. 3 types of villain robots worth 1, 2, and 3 points. Excuse me. A tall, blue-haired boy with glasses abruptly stood up, his arm chopping the air rigidly. You have presented only 3 types of robots, but the printout clearly shows 4. If this is an error, you should be ashamed. The boy then turned around, pointing a stiff finger directly at Izuku, who was sitting 3 rows back. And you, with the unruly green hair. You have been exuding a heavy, intimidating aura since you sat down. It is distracting to the rest of us who are trying to focus. If you are here to intimidate the competition, you should leave immediately. The auditorium went dead silent. Dozens of eyes snapped toward Izuku. Izuku didn't flinch. He slowly stood up. As he did, he realized that he had, unconsciously, let his alpha aura leak out due to his anticipation for the exam. He took a deep breath, reining in the kinetic pressure, pulling the aura back into his core until he just felt like a normal teenager again. I apologize, Izuku said loudly and clearly, bowing respectfully to the boy with glasses. My quirk naturally emits a localized pressure wave when I am anticipating combat. It was a lapse in my control, and I am sorry for distracting you. I meant no disrespect to you or to Yue. Izuku's calm, articulate apology instantly diffused the situation. The blue-haired boy blinked, his rigid posture faltering. I see. A biological byproduct of your quirk. The boy adjusted his glasses, bowing back. I apologize for my hasty accusation. I am Tenya Ida. It's nice to meet you, Ida. Izuku smiled, sitting back down. President Mike coughed into the microphone. Right. Well handled, listener. As for your question, Examinee 7111, the fourth robot is the zero-pointer. It's an obstacle. A massive gimmick that will rampage in close quarters. I recommend running away from it. An obstacle to be avoided, Izuku thought, jotting the note down mentally. Understood. Battle Center B. Izuku stood at the back of the massive crowd of teenagers gathered before the colossal gates of the fake city. Most of the examinees were stretching, whispering nervously to one another, or eyeing the competition. Uraraka and Ida were somewhere near the front. Izuku didn't stretch. He stood perfectly still, his eyes closed. He was pushing his sensory net out. He could hear the hum of the massive hydraulic engines behind the gates. He could smell the ozone and oil of the robots. He was mapping the immediate geometry of the city based on the echoes of the wind. All right, let's start. President Mick's voice boomed from an unseen speaker. The massive gates began to slowly groan open. Before they were even a quarter of the way open, before any other student had even twitched, Izuku Midoriya was gone. He slipped through the narrow gap in the gates like a ghost, breaking into a dead sprint down the main avenue of the fake city. What are you waiting for? President Mike yelled at the bewildered crowd. There are no countdowns in real battles. Run! Run! The green-haired kid already gets it. The crowd panicked and surged forward, but they were already hopelessly behind. Izuku slid to a halt in the center of an intersection. From the alleys to his left, right, and front, 3 one-point robots rolled out, their red targeting sensors locking onto him. Target acquired, the robots buzzed in unison. Izuku didn't take a fighting stance. He simply shoved his hands into his pockets and looked down at his shadow. Apex Legion, Izuku commanded, his voice echoing off the concrete buildings. Unleash 20. The ensuing eruption of kinetic energy was cataclysmic. The area around Izuku plummeted in temperature. The shadows of the surrounding buildings violently elongated, surging toward Izuku's feet. With a sound like tearing canvas, 20 massive, midnight blue wolves exploded into existence. They were terrifying. Each one was the size of a lion, composed of swirling, hyperdense kinetic smoke. Their emerald eyes illuminated the intersection. The sheer wind pressure of their simultaneous materialization shattered the windows of the nearby fake buildings. Izuku stood calmly in the center of the swirling tempest of fur and shadow, his eyes glowing slightly to match his pack. He pointed a single finger forward. Clear the sector. The pack moved. It wasn't a fight, it was a slaughter. The 20 wolves split into 4 squads of 5. They moved at speeds that the naked eye struggled to track. The 3 one-pointers didn't even have time to fire their rubber bullets. 2 wolves slammed into the first robot. They didn't bite the metal, they used their kinetic density to simply smash right through it. 1 wolf phased through the robot's chest, tearing out its central wiring, while the second crushed its head beneath a massive paw. 3 points. In the observation room hidden deep within Yue, a wall of monitors displayed the action. The faculty watched in stunned silence as Izuku Midoriya's points skyrocketed on the leaderboard. Good lord, muttered Snipe, the gun-toting hero. Is that an emitter or a summoning quirk? The physical force those constructs are outputting is equivalent to a small car crash. And look at his control, Shota Aizawa noted, his tired eyes narrowing. He isn't just letting them rampage. They are operating in highly coordinated squads. He has a panoramic view of the battlefield. On the screen, a massive 3-pointer launched a volley of missiles at a terrified examinee. Before the missiles could connect, 2 of Izuku's wolves vaulted off a wall, intercepting the projectiles mid-air. The explosion shattered the wolves, dissipating them into smoke. But immediately, the smoke rapidly funneled back to Izuku, who was walking calmly down the street, and 2 new wolves materialized instantly from his shadow to resume the hunt. They regenerate? Midnight gasped. Or rather, they can't be destroyed permanently. And he just earned rescue points for saving that boy. He's currently sitting at 65 villain points and 20 rescue points. We're only 4 minutes in. Sitting in the back of the dark room, in his muscular form, All Might smiled proudly. Show them, young Midoriya. Show them the power of a true king. Back in the fake city, the other examinees were in awe. Many of them had stopped fighting entirely, simply watching as the dark tide of wolves swept through the streets, dismantling robots with terrifying efficiency. Izuku didn't hoard the points though. If he saw another student struggling, he would have a wolf disable a robot's legs, leaving the final blow for the other examinee. He was acting as a field commander, ensuring everyone's survival while dominating the landscape. 80 points, Izuku tallied in his head, walking casually past the smoking wreckage of a 2-pointer. That should be more than enough to secure a spot. I'll spend the remaining time acting as a safety net for the others. Suddenly, the ground beneath Izuku's feet violently trembled. A shadow fell over the intersection, eclipsing the sun. The sound of grinding metal and collapsing concrete filled the air. At the far end of the avenue, a colossal machine rose above the buildings. It was easily the size of a skyscraper, its massive treads crushing entire city blocks to dust. The 0-pointer. Less than 2 minutes left. Present Mike announced. Panic erupted. The examinees, realizing the sheer scale of the behemoth, turned and fled in terror. Run! It's too big. We can't fight that thing. Izuku watched the machine advance. He felt no fear. He knew it was just an obstacle. He turned to join the retreat, ready to recall his pack. Ow! Help! Izuku froze. His enhanced hearing caught the faint, desperate cry over the roar of the crumbling buildings. He whipped his head around. Near the path of the advancing 0-pointer, Achiko Uraraka was pinned to the ground, her leg trapped under a massive slab of debris. The robot was raising its colossal arm, preparing to smash the street into oblivion. She was in the direct line of fire. The other students were running past her, too blinded by fear to notice. Izuku's emerald eyes narrowed. The calm, calculated commander vanished. The Alpha took over. Pack! Recall! Izuku roared. All 20 wolves instantly dissolved into smoke, rocketing through the air and slamming back into Izuku's shadow. The sudden influx of returned stamina surged through his veins. He sprinted toward Uraraka. The 0-pointer's arm was descending. There was no time to get the debris off her and run. He had to stop the arm. Izuku stopped dead in the center of the street, planting his feet firmly into the concrete. He looked up at the falling metal fist, which was the size of a house. Fenrir! Izuku bellowed. The alpha wolf didn't just emerge from the shadow. It exploded outward, twice as large as before, completely composed of condensed, hypervolatile kinetic energy. The air pressure around Izuku became so intense that the asphalt beneath him cracked and spider-webbed. Pack integration, Alpha override, Fenrir roared, a sound that shattered the remaining glass in a 2-block radius, and collapsed into a localized tornado of dark energy. The tornado spiraled around Izuku, slamming into his chest. The transformation was explosive. Midnight blue smoke coated Izuku's body like a second skin, forming a phantom silhouette of a wolf around him. His muscles bulged to the absolute limit of his 10 months of training. His green eyes blazed with a blinding, terrifying light. The alpha aura he emitted was no longer just pressure. It was a tangible, gravitational force that pulverized the debris around him. Izuku crouched low, his leg muscles coiling tighter than industrial springs. He leaped. The sonic boom of his launch shattered the ground, leaving a crater 10 feet deep where he had just stood. Izuku didn't just jump. He flew. He rocketed upward at Mach speed, a streak of midnight energy trailing behind him. He intercepted the falling fist of the 0-pointer midair. Izuku spun, channeling the entirety of Fenrir's monstrous kinetic mass into his right leg. Smash! Izuku's foot connected with the center of the robot's face. The impact was deafening. The sheer kinetic force transferred from Izuku's leg into the metal. The shockwave rippled outward, warping the air itself. The 0-pointer's head didn't just break, it completely imploded. The kinetic force traveled down the robot's spine, blowing out its internal circuitry in a massive chain reaction of explosions. The colossal behemoth groaned, tilted backward, and crashed into the ruined cityscape in a spectacular fireball, entirely defeated by a single strike. Silence fell over Battle Center B. High above the ground, Izuku's integration timed out. The shadow energy violently ripped itself from his body, dissipating into the wind. The backlash of the force shot through Izuku's legs. Both his right femur and left tibia fractured under the immense pressure of his own attack. Ah! Izuku grunted, beginning to free fall toward the earth. I didn't train my bones enough for the alpha override. I can't summon a wolf midair to catch me with broken legs. Before he could hit the ground, he felt a sudden lightness. Slap. Uraraka, having used her quirk on the debris to free herself, had pushed herself upward, slapping Izuku's face with her fingertips. Release! She gasped, pressing her fingers together. Izuku dropped the last few feet, landing relatively gently on the pavement, though the pain in his legs made him wince. Uraraka collapsed next to him, panting heavily. You saved me, Uraraka breathed, staring at him with wide, awestruck eyes. That was unbelievable. Izuku offered a pained, but genuine smile, his canines returning to their normal size. You saved me too, Uraraka. Thank you. Time's up. Present Mix's voice echoed across the ruined city. The remaining examinees slowly walked out from their hiding spots, staring at the smoking, decapitated ruin of the zero-pointer, and then at the boy lying on the ground. In the observation room, the silence was absolute. Nizu, the principal of UA, slowly lowered his cup of tea. He looked at the final scoreboard. Izuku Midoriya. Villain points, 85. Rescue points, 60. Total, 145. He had not just passed. He had shattered the previous school record, held by All Might himself, by a massive margin. An unstoppable, regenerating army, Aizawa murmured, his eyes locked on Izuku's smiling face on the monitor. And when the army isn't enough, he becomes the monster himself. Aizawa offered a rare, terrifying grin. This year's class is going to be a problem. The hunt had just begun. The morning of his first day at UA High School, Izuku Midoriya stood before the full-length mirror in his bedroom, adjusting the stiff crimson tie of his uniform. The brass buttons of his gray blazer gleamed in the early sunlight filtering through his window. He looked older than 15. The grueling 10 months of physical conditioning at Dagoba Beach had sculpted his frame, giving him broad shoulders and a confident, grounded stance. But it wasn't just his physique that commanded attention. It was the quiet, thrumming energy that seemed to bend the light around him. Izuku looked down at his feet. His shadow, cast by the bedroom lamp, was not a static silhouette. It rippled and churned like the surface of a dark, tempestuous ocean. Within that two-dimensional void, he could feel them. Dozens of heartbeats, perfectly synchronized with his own. They were resting, waiting, humming with the coiled potential of a hurricane. All right, pack, Izuku murmured softly, his voice carrying that faint, baritone resonance that always surfaced when he addressed his quirk. Today, we enter a new hunting ground. Be on your best behavior. A low, affectionate rumble vibrated from the floorboards, a physical sensation that traveled up Izuku's legs and warmed his chest. Izuku! Breakfast is ready. You don't want to be late on your first day. Inko's voice called from the kitchen. Coming, Mom! Izuku replied, his sharp canines flashing in a warm smile. He grabbed his yellow backpack and headed out the door. The Alpha was ready for UA. Finding Class 1A was an ordeal in itself, given the labyrinthine corridors of the massive school. When Izuku finally stood before the towering, comically oversized door labeled 1A, he took a deep breath. He could hear the voices inside clearly with his enhanced hearing. Take your feet off that desk immediately. It is a profound disrespect to your classmates, and the upperclassmen who used this desk before you. Ha! Who the hell are you to tell me what to do, Four Eyes? What middle school are you from, Extra? Izuku sighed. Kaken and Ida. Of course. He slid the massive door open. The argument abruptly halted as the entire class turned to look at the newcomer. Izuku stepped into the room. He didn't say a word, but his mere presence shifted the atmosphere. The natural alpha aura he emitted, even when tightly suppressed, was palpable. It was a subliminal weight in the air, a localized gravity that demanded attention. It wasn't oppressive like it was in combat, it was simply authoritative. Tenya Ida, the tall, blue-haired boy from the entrance exam, immediately marched over, his arms chopping the air in rigid, right angles. Ah! You are the boy from the auditorium. I am Tenya Ida from Semi-Private Academy. Ida bowed respectfully. I must apologize again for my presumptuous behavior during the orientation. Furthermore, I must commend you. You realized there was a hidden rescue metric in the practical exam, did you not? I was completely blind to it. I misjudged you. You are a superior candidate. Izuku smiled, waving a hand dismissively. It's nice to see you again, Ida. And please, just call me Midoriya. As for the rescue points, I didn't know about them. I just saw someone who needed help, and my body moved on its own. Midoriya! Izuku turned to see Achiko Uraraka bounding over, her face lighting up. You made it! I mean, of course you made it. You destroyed that massive robot in one punch. Or, well, one kick. That was so incredible. Thanks, Uraraka. I'm glad to see you pass too, Izuku said, feeling a slight flush on his cheeks. Despite his commanding quirk, he was still a teenage boy. Hey, Deku. The gruff voice cut through the friendly chatter. Katsuki Bakugo was sitting at his desk, his feet firmly planted on the floor this time, though he was leaning back with a fierce scowl. His crimson eyes were locked onto Izuku. Kaken, Izuku acknowledged, giving a polite nod. Don't think that flashy stunt at the exam makes you the top dog here, Katsuki growled, small sparks popping off his palms. I got second place overall. I'm right behind you, and in this school I'm going to rip that number 1 spot away from you. I don't care how many mutts you summon. The rest of the class watched the exchange with wide eyes, sensing the intense, historical rivalry between the two boys. If you're just here to make friends and wag your tails, you can pack up your stuff and leave. The tired, deadpan voice came from the floor. The entire class jumped. Lying in the doorway was a man wrapped entirely in a bright yellow sleeping bag, looking resembling an oversized, exhausted caterpillar. He unzipped the bag and stood up, revealing a disheveled man in black tactical gear, a gray capture weapon wrapped around his neck like a scarf. His dark eyes looked as though he hadn't slept in a decade. It took you lot 8 seconds to quiet down, the man sighed, pulling a juice pouch from somewhere and taking a sip. Time is a precious resource. You kids aren't rational enough. I'm Shota Aizawa, your homeroom teacher. Homeroom teacher? The class thought collectively. This guy looks homeless. Aizawa reached into his sleeping bag and pulled out a stack of blue and white tracksuits. Put these on and meet me out on the P grounds. We're doing a quirk apprehension test. The morning sun beat down on the sprawling dirt field of UA's training grounds. Class 1A stood in their gym uniforms, shivering slightly under the intense, analyzing glare of Shota Aizawa. A quirk apprehension test? Uraraka asked, voicing the confusion of the class. What about the entrance ceremony? Or orientation? If you're going to become heroes, you don't have time for leisurely events, Aizawa said bluntly, holding a digital tablet. UA's selling point is its unrestricted traditions. That also applies to how the teachers run their classes. You've been taking standardized fitness tests since elementary school. But you were never allowed to use your quirks. It's an irrational system created by the Ministry of Education. Aizawa turned his gaze to Katsuki. Bakugo, you finished first in the practical exam among the normal applicants, correct? Katsuki scowled. Among the normal applicants. It was a subtle reminder that Izuku's score had transcended the standard metrics. Yeah. What was your best result for the softball throw in junior high? 67 meters. Try doing it with your quirk, Aizawa instructed, tossing Katsuki a baseball. Stay in the circle. Anything goes, as long as you don't step out. Katsuki stepped into the chalk circle. He stretched his arms, a feral grin spreading across his face. He wound his pitching arm back, his sweat igniting in his palm. Die! Katsuki roared. A massive, concussive blast of fire and shockwave propelled the ball out of his hand, sending it rocketing into the stratosphere, leaving a trail of smoke in its wake. The sheer force of the wind ruffled the hair of the students standing nearby. Aizawa looked at a device in his hand, which beeped. He held it up for the class to see. 705.2 meters. Before anything else, you must know your own maximum capabilities, Aizawa said lazily. This is the most rational metric for determining the foundation of a hero. 700 meters? That's awesome. An electric blonde boy named Kaminari cheered. We can use our quirks as much as we want? This looks like so much fun. A pink-skinned girl named Ishido added, bouncing on her heels. Aizawa's eyes darkened. The air around him suddenly felt heavy and dangerous. Fun? You have 3 years here to become heroes. You think it's going to be games and playtime the whole way? Idiots. Alright, new rule. Whoever comes in last place across all 8 physical tests will be judged to have no potential, and will be expelled immediately. Expelled? The class screamed. We're free to do what we want with our students. Welcome to UA's hero course, Aizawa smiled, a terrifying, sadistic expression. Izuku didn't flinch. He recognized a logical ruse when he heard one. But even if it was real, he wasn't worried. He looked down at his shadow. It was time to show his pack's versatility. Test 1, 50-meter dash, Aizawa called out, pointing to the track. Izuku stepped up to the starting line next to Ida. Ida took a highly specialized sprinter's stance, his calf engines revving up with a high-pitched whine. Midoriya, Ida said, his eyes focused on the finish line. I look forward to seeing your speed. However, my quirk, engine, makes this my domain. Izuku offered a small smile. May the best man win, Ida. Izuku didn't take a running stance. Instead, he whistled, a sharp, piercing sound. Instantly, his shadow expanded. The air temperature dropped, and the distinct hum of kinetic energy filled the air. A massive, midnight blue wolf materialized at Izuku's side. However, this wolf was different from Fenrir. It wasn't built for raw, concussive power. It was incredibly sleek, its legs unnaturally long, its body aerodynamic, and its kinetic fur smoothed down like the feathers of a falcon. Before Ida could even process what he was seeing, Izuku smoothly swung his leg over the beast's back, mounting it like a seasoned cavalry rider. His hands gripped the thick, kinetic mane, which felt like holding onto a solid electric current. On your marks. A small robot at the starting line buzzed. Get set. Go! Bang! Ida shot off the line like a bullet, his engines blasting exhaust. But Izuku didn't run. He merely sent a single, instinctual command through the sensory link. The sleek wolf didn't just accelerate, it exploded into motion. The sheer force of its first step shattered the ground at the starting line. To the other students, Izuku simply became a blue and black blur. The wind generated by the wolf's passage nearly blew Ida off his feet. Beep. 1.4 seconds, the robotic voice announced at the finish line. Beep. 3.04 seconds, it announced as Ida crossed directly after. Izuku gently patted the wolf's neck as it skidded to a graceful halt. The class was silent, jaws slacked. What was that speed? Kaminari gasped. He literally rode his shadow. Aizawa jotted a note on his tablet. Perfect synergy. He alters the physical composition of his constructs to suit the task. A high-level application of an already overpowered quirk. The tests continued, and Izuku established a hierarchy of dominance without uttering a single boastful word. During the grip strength test, Izuku didn't use a wolf. He gripped the dynamometer in his right hand and whispered, "Pack integration, hand." His forearm temporarily darkened, the skin taking on a midnight blue hue as he channeled the kinetic density of a single wolf directly into his muscles. The machine shrieked, the digital numbers rapidly maxing out before the metal handle completely crushed inward under his grip. He scored a literal unmeasurable. During the standing long jump, Izuku summoned 2 of his phase shift, fluid wolves. They positioned themselves on the ground, creating a makeshift, highly volatile trampoline of kinetic energy. Izuku stepped onto them, the energy repelling his physical mass, and he was launched effortlessly over the sandbox, clearing the entire pit. During the repeated side steps, he utilized the same phase shift wolves, placing them on either side of him. He bounced between their solid yet elastic forms at blinding speeds, creating afterimages. Finally, it was time for the softball throw. Izuku stepped into the circle. He held the small, white baseball in his hand. The class watched with bated breath. Uraraka had just scored an infinity by making the ball weightless. Katsuki had set the physical bar at 705 meters. Izuku didn't wind up like a pitcher. He simply tossed the ball gently into the air. Fetch, Izuku said softly. From his shadow, a wolf identical to the one he had ridden during the dash materialized. It didn't wait for the ball to hit the ground. The beast leaped, its jaws snapping around the baseball midair, and then it ran. The wolf didn't run on the ground. It bounded forward, and with each step, a small burst of dark kinetic energy condensed beneath its paws, creating temporary, solid platforms in the air. The wolf sprinted straight up toward the sky at a 45-degree angle, accelerating to supersonic speeds. It became a shrinking blue dot in seconds, piercing through the clouds. Izuku stood in the circle, his eyes closed, tracking the wolf through his sensory link. The drain on his stamina was steady, but manageable. He waited a full 10 seconds, feeling the wolf cross miles of airspace above the city. Finally, Izuku opened his eyes and snapped his fingers. Miles away in the sky, the wolf dissolved into smoke, instantly transferring its kinetic energy back to Izuku, leaving the baseball to fall somewhere in the next prefecture. Aizawa looked down at his GPS tracker device. The numbers climbed wildly before stopping at the exact moment the wolf dissipated. Aizawa turned the screen to the class. 8,432.6 meters. Silence descended upon the P grounds. Over 8 kilometers, Kaminari whispered, clutching his hair. Is he human? Katsuki stood rigid, his fists trembling violently at his sides. He had trained his body to withstand immense explosive blowback. He had optimized his sweat glands. He had honed his instincts to perfection. But how was he supposed to compete with a power that could casually cross a city while its user stood completely still, his hands in his pockets? Deku. Katsuki growled, a mixture of intense frustration and fierce, burning resolve lighting up his eyes. You think you're so far ahead? Aizawa put his tablet away. That's it for the tests. I'll project your total scores. A holographic screen appeared. Izuku's name sat comfortably at the very top, at number 1. Katsuki was number 3, having been edged out slightly by Yaoyorozu's creative quirk usage. At the very bottom was Minoru Mineta, a short boy with purple balls on his head, who began to sob uncontrollably. By the way, I was lying about the expulsion, Aizawa said, a creepy smile stretching across his tired face. It was a logical ruse to draw out your upper limits. Mineta collapsed in relief. With that, we're done here, Aizawa said, turning to walk away. Midoriya. Izuku paused, looking at his teacher. Your quirk is inherently chaotic, Aizawa noted, his dark eyes analyzing the boy. Summoning and maintaining autonomous energy constructs should, by all rights, be a logistical nightmare. Yet you control them with the precision of a scalpel. You have complete mastery over your power. Don't let it make you arrogant. Power without strategy is just a bigger target. I understand, Sensei. Thank you, Izuku bowed respectfully, his shadow swirling calmly at his feet. Aizawa nodded, turning his back. He's polite, disciplined, and terrifyingly strong. He has the presence of a pro hero who's been on the job for 10 years. If anyone can keep a wild card like Bakugo in check, it's him. Hero Informatics Battle Trial Prep. The afternoon classes were a stark contrast to the grueling physical tests of the morning. Izuku sat attentively through English with present mic and modern hero art history with midnight, but a palpable tension hummed through Class 1A. They were waiting for one specific class. I.M. The massive door to 1A burst open. Coming through the door like a normal person, All Might strode into the classroom, decked out in his Silver Age costume, his massive cape billowing behind him. The class erupted into cheers and gasps of awe. Izuku beamed, his internal fanboy momentarily suppressing his calm alpha exterior. All Might! And he's wearing the Silver Age suit! The detail on the muscular shading is even more impressive in person. Hero basic training. All Might bellowed, flexing his biceps. The class that will put you through all sorts of special training to mold you into heroes. And today, we're jumping right into it. Battle training. All Might pointed a massive finger toward the wall, where panels suddenly slid open to reveal rows of numbered metal cases. And to go with that battle training, The costumes you requested before school started, based on your Quirk registrations. The class cheered louder, rushing to grab their cases. Get changed and meet me at ground beta. All Might commanded. Today, you step out onto the field not as students, but as heroes. 20 minutes later, Class 1A stepped out of the tunnel leading to ground beta, a massive, simulated city block. They looked magnificent, a vibrant display of colors, armor, and specialized gear. Izuku emerged from the tunnel, the last to arrive, and immediately drew the eyes of his classmates. His costume was a masterclass in tactical design, heavily influenced by his intense physical training and the nature of his quirk. He didn't wear bright, flashy colors. His suit was primarily a deep, midnight blue that bordered on black, accented with forest green plating. He wore a fitted, sleeveless compression shirt made of a highly durable, heat-resistant polymer, designed to withstand the volatile kinetic friction of his pack integration. Over his chest and shoulders, he wore a lightweight, matte black tactical vest loaded with utility pouches. His forearms were wrapped in thick, green reinforced gauntlets that extended to fingerless gloves, allowing for maximum grip when he fought hand-to-hand. His pants were loose, dark cargo style, tucked into heavy-duty, steel-toed combat boots designed to anchor him when channeling the massive physical blowback of his alpha wolves. But the most striking feature was the half-mask he wore over the lower portion of his face. It was styled aggressively, resembling the snarling jaw of a wolf, made of a dark, metallic mesh. He wore it pulled down around his neck for now, revealing his calm, focused expression. Midoriya! Uraraka jogged over, her pink and black space suit looking incredibly sleek. Your costume looks amazing. It's so tactical. You look like a pro. Thanks, Uraraka. Yours looks great too, very streamlined for mobility, Izuku complimented her. All Might stood before the gathered class, his hands on his hips. Looking good is half the battle, young heroes. Now, it's time for combat. Today's lesson is a 2-on-2 indoor battle trial. All Might explained the rules. The villains had a nuclear weapon hidden inside a multi-story building. The heroes had to infiltrate, capture the villains, or secure the weapon within 15 minutes. Teams were drawn by lots. Izuku watched as All Might pulled the balls from the boxes. Team A will be Izuku Midoriya and Achiko Uraraka. All Might announced. Izuku smiled at Uraraka. Looks like we're a pack for this exercise. Let's do our best. Yeah! She cheered, pumping her fist. And Team D. All Might pulled 2 more balls. Katsuki Bakugo and Tenya Ida. Izuku's emerald eyes narrowed slightly. He looked across the crowd. Katsuki was already glaring at him, a feral, bloodthirsty grin stretching across his face beneath his black domino mask. Katsuki's costume was aggressively flashy, featuring massive, grenade-shaped gauntlets on his forearms. The first match to be fought. All Might reached into 2 separate boxes, pulling out the letters. Team A as the heroes, versus Team D as the villains. A collective murmur went through the class. The 2 boys who had completely dominated the physical tests that morning were being pitted against each other immediately. Bakugo, Ida, head inside the building and set up your defenses, All Might instructed. Midoriya, Uraraka, you have 5 minutes to strategize before your infiltration begins. As Katsuki walked past Izuku to enter the building, he paused. He didn't yell. He just leaned in close. I've got 15 minutes, Deku, Katsuki whispered, his voice vibrating with barely contained explosive energy. 15 minutes to burn your entire pack to ashes and prove I'm the strongest in this school. Don't hold back, Alpha. Because I'm going to kill you. Izuku didn't flinch. His aura flared, a sudden, heavy pressure that made Uraraka step back in surprise. Izuku's eyes locked onto Katsuki's, glowing with a fierce, unwavering light. I never hold back, Kaken. But you won't reach me. The battle trial execution. Outside the building, Izuku knelt down, pulling a small schematic of the building's layout from his utility belt. Uraraka knelt beside him. All right, Midoriya, Uraraka said, looking a bit nervous. What's the plan? Bakugo is intense. And Ida is super fast. Ida will likely stay with the weapon to guard it, Izuku analyzed smoothly, pointing at the top floor of the blueprint. He takes rules very seriously, so he'll play the role of the villainous guard perfectly. Kaken, however, won't care about the objective. He's hunting me. He'll ambush us the second we step inside. So, what do we do? Izuku's shadow rippled beneath him. He tapped his foot once against the concrete. We establish absolute control of the territory before we even walk in. From Izuku's shadow, 4 tiny, rat-sized constructs of black kinetic energy scurried out. They were scout wolves, heavily condensed and practically invisible in the dim lighting. Without a sound, the 4 tiny wolves darted toward the building, slipping through the cracks under the doors and into the ventilation shafts. Izuku closed his eyes. His mind compartmentalized, opening up 4 new visual feeds. First floor clear. Second floor clear. Third floor there. Kaken is hiding around the corner of the main stairwell, waiting to ambush. Fourth floor, fifth floor. Found the payload. Room 502. Ida is pacing around it. Izuku opened his eyes and stood up. I have their exact positions. The weapon is on the 5th floor, north room. Kaken is waiting to ambush us on the 3rd floor stairwell. Uraraka stared at him, her mouth slightly open. You already found them? We haven't even gone inside yet. My pack has eyes everywhere. Izuku smiled kindly. Here is the strategy. We will enter through a 2nd floor window to bypass Kaken's line of sight on the ground floor. When we engage Kaken, I will draw his full attention. You make a break for the 5th floor to secure the weapon. But Midoriya, Bakugo's explosions are incredibly destructive. Are you sure you can handle him alone in such a confined space? Izuku's expression hardened, his canines showing. I won't just handle him, Uraraka. I'm going to shut him down. A buzzer sounded over the PA system. Hero team, infiltrate! Izuku grabbed Uraraka's hand. Make yourself light. Uraraka touched her own chest, activating her quirk, zero gravity. Izuku immediately summoned a large, spring-like phase wolf beneath his feet. He jumped, the kinetic bounce propelling both him and the weightless Uraraka directly up to a 2nd-story window. Izuku kicked the glass in, and they tumbled into a dark hallway. Uraraka released her quirk, landing softly. Stay behind me, Izuku whispered, pulling his wolf-jaw mask up over his face. They moved silently up the stairs to the 3rd floor. Izuku's sensory net fed him Katsuki's exact movements. Katsuki was growing impatient, shifting his weight around the corner ahead. Izuku held up a hand, stopping Uraraka. He held up 3 fingers, counting down. 3, 2, 1. Katsuki couldn't wait any longer. He leaped out from behind the corner, leading with a massive, right-handed explosion aimed directly at the hallway. I know you're there, DKU. Before the flames could even leave Katsuki's palm, a blur of midnight blue energy materialized directly in front of his face. Izuku hadn't just stood there. He had summoned a heavy defense wolf right in Katsuki's blind spot. Katsuki's explosion detonated point-blank into the beast's chest. The concussive force echoed through the concrete hallway, shaking the dust from the ceiling. The wolf shattered into smoke, but the blast was completely absorbed, leaving Izuku and Uraraka entirely untouched. Go, Uraraka! Now! Izuku commanded. Uraraka didn't hesitate. As Katsuki stumbled back from the recoil of hitting a solid kinetic wall, she darted past him, heading straight for the stairs leading to the 4th floor. Oh no, you don't! Katsuki snarled, raising his left hand to blast Uraraka's back. Snap! Katsuki gasped. A 2nd wolf, roughly the size of a mastiff, had materialized from Izuku's shadow, launching itself forward and clamping its massive, ethereal jaws shut around Katsuki's left gauntlet. It didn't pierce his skin, but the sheer kinetic density of the bite locked Katsuki's arm in place, anchoring him to the floor. Get off me, you damn mutt! Katsuki roared, trying to shake his arm free. Izuku stepped out of the smoke, standing 10 feet away, his arms crossed over his chest. The hallway grew freezing cold. His eyes glowed a vibrant, piercing green through the dark hallways. Your fight is with me, Kaken. Izuku's voice was devoid of emotion, echoing with a chilling, baritone resonance. Leave the girl alone. Up in the monitor room, the rest of Class 1A was watching the screens in absolute silence. He's completely neutralizing Bakugo's mobility, Kirishima, a red-haired boy, noted in awe. Bakugo's a powerhouse, but Midoriya plays like a grandmaster in chess. He's always 3 steps ahead. Look at the other screen. Yaoyorozu pointed. Midoriya isn't just fighting Bakugo. He's fighting Ida at the same time. On the 5th floor, Uraraka burst into the payload room. Ah! Uraraka! You have arrived! Ida shouted, entirely in character. But alas, you are too late. I am the villainous mastermind, and I have anticipated your arrival. I have removed all loose objects from this room to render your zero-gravity quirk useless. Uraraka gulped. The room was indeed completely bare, save for the massive fake bomb in the center. Ida revved his engines, preparing to blitz her. You cannot defeat my speed, hero, Uraraka smiled. I don't have to beat your speed, Ida. Midoriya already did. Ida blinked. What? The shadows in the corners of the payload room violently erupted. Izuku, while standing completely still on the 3rd floor staring down Katsuki, was actively manipulating his pack 2 floors up. 3 massive, heavily armored wolves lunged out of the darkness of the 5th floor room. What in the name of villainy? Ida shrieked as the beasts converged on him. Ida tried to run, but the wolves didn't attack where he was. They attacked where he was going to be. The first wolf slammed its dense body into Ida's legs, knocking him off balance. As he fell, the other 2 wolves pounced. One pinned his left arm to the floor, the other his right. They were heavy, each weighing the equivalent of a small boulder in kinetic pressure. Ida was immobilized instantly, completely unharmed but utterly trapped. Now Uraraka! Izuku's voice commanded, echoing from the jaws of the wolf pinning Ida's left arm. The pack was his mouthpiece. Right. Uraraka cheered, running past the struggling Ida and touching the nuclear payload. Secured. Hero Team has secured the weapon. The match is theoretically over. All Might's voice boomed over the PA system. However, as a combat exercise, you may continue until capture tape is applied or time runs out. On the 3rd floor, Katsuki heard the announcement. He stopped struggling against the wolf biting his arm. He slowly lowered his head, his blonde bangs shadowing his eyes. You! Katsuki's voice trembled, a terrifying, low vibration of absolute rage. You fought 4 eyes while standing right in front of me? You split your attention? Am I a joke to you, Deku? Izuku uncrossed his arms. The wolf holding Katsuki's arm dissipated, returning to Izuku's shadow. You aren't a joke, Kaken. But you are predictable. You fight with rage, I fight with strategy. The outcome was decided before we entered the building. Katsuki's head snapped up. His eyes were wide, bloodshot, and completely feral. He reached his right hand over to the massive, grenade-shaped gauntlet on his left arm. He grabbed the metal pin attached to the firing mechanism. You think you've won because your little girlfriend touched the bomb? Katsuki screamed, a manic, desperate smile stretching across his face. These gauntlets store my explosive sweat. They're fully loaded. I'm gonna vaporize you and every single one of your damn mutts. Let's see your strategy survive this. In the monitor room, All Might grabbed the microphone in a panic. Young Bakugo. Stop. Are you trying to kill him? If you use that indoors, the structural integrity of the building will fail. He'll be fine if he dodges. Katsuki roared, ignoring the earpiece. He yanked the pin. The mechanism clicked. A blinding, orange light erupted from the barrel of the gauntlet as a massive, lethal concussive blast of fire and shockwave was unleashed down the narrow concrete hallway. The sheer heat warped the metal railings. It was an attack meant to obliterate anything in its path. Izuku didn't dodge. If he dodged, the blast would carry through the building, potentially collapsing the floor Uraraka was on. He had to stop it head-on, but a single defense wolf would shatter instantly under that much concentrated firepower. Izuku closed his eyes, his hands falling to his sides. He unleashed his aura, dropping the temperature of the hallway to near freezing in a fraction of a second. Apex Legion, Izuku commanded, his voice a thundering roar that shook the very foundations of the building. 12 massive wolves erupted from his shadow simultaneously, forming a tight, semicircular wall of kinetic energy in front of him. But they didn't brace for impact. They didn't harden their bodies to absorb the blast. Instead, all 12 wolves threw their massive heads back, opening their jaws wide, their kinetic throats glowing with a blinding, vibrating light. Alpha howl. The 12 wolves unleashed a synchronized, concussive wave of pure sonic and kinetic energy directly into the oncoming pillar of fire. The clash was not an explosion. It was an erasure. The alpha howl created a localized vacuum, a massive, vibrating shockwave that literally ripped the oxygen out of the air in the hallway. Without oxygen, combustion is impossible. The roaring pillar of fire coming from Katsuki's gauntlet hit the sonic wave and abruptly, silently, choked out. The flames were snuffed out like a candle in a hurricane, but the concussive force of the howl didn't stop. The invisible wave of kinetic energy blasted forward, hitting Katsuki squarely in the chest. G.U.H. Katsuki was lifted off his feet and thrown violently backward. He flew down the hallway, crashing heavily into the concrete wall at the end of the corridor. He slumped to the ground, the wind completely knocked out of his lungs, his gauntlets smoking uselessly. Silence rushed back into the hallway, save for the low, predatory growls of the 12 wolves surrounding their alpha. Izuku walked slowly down the hall, his boots echoing sharply on the concrete. The wolves parted for him, moving fluidly into his shadow as he passed them until only Fenrir remained, walking loyally at his side. Izuku stopped in front of Katsuki. The blonde boy was struggling to sit up, gasping for breath, his eyes wide with a mixture of shock, exhaustion, and the bitter, suffocating taste of total defeat. Izuku reached into his utility belt, pulled out the white capture tape, and gently wrapped it around Katsuki's right wrist. "You're strong, Kaken. Your firepower is incredible," Izuku said softly, his voice devoid of mockery, offering only genuine respect. "But a king doesn't just need power. He needs a pack. And he needs to know how to lead them." Izuku stood up, looking down at his childhood rival. The glowing emerald eyes of the alpha met the stunned crimson eyes of the explosive prodigy. "Checkmate. The villain Bakugo captured. Hero team win." All Might's voice crackled over the PA, sounding genuinely shaken. Aftermath analysis. The walk back to the monitor room was quiet. Katsuki refused to look at Izuku, marching ahead with his hands shoved deep into his pockets, his shoulders hunched. Izuku walked alongside Uraraka, who was practically vibrating with adrenaline and awe. When they entered the dark monitor room, the rest of Class 1A parted for Izuku, parting like a sea before a leviathan. There was no more casual chatter. The entire class had just witnessed a level of power and tactical supremacy that belonged in the top 10 of the Pro Hero Billboard chart, not in a high school classroom. "Excellent work, both teams." All Might forced a hearty laugh, trying to dispel the heavy tension in the room. "Now, can anyone tell me who the MVP of this match was?" "It was Midoriya, sir." Without question, Momo Yayorozu, a tall girl with a black ponytail, stated confidently. "Correct, young Yayorozu. Can you explain why?" "It was a flawless execution of tactical dominance," Yayorozu analyzed, her eyes shining with intellectual respect as she looked at Izuku. Midoriya accurately predicted his opponent's movements before entering the building. He secured the objective while simultaneously engaging and neutralizing both threats on separate floors, utilizing his Quirk's multitasking capabilities to perfection. Furthermore, when faced with a lethal, structurally compromising attack from Bakugo, he did not panic or dodge. He utilized a highly advanced, physics-based counterattack, the Alpha Howl, to suffocate the explosion, protecting both the building and his opponents from fatal harm. He operated with the foresight, power, and restraint of a seasoned pro hero. All Might nodded enthusiastically. "A perfect analysis. Young Midoriya, your control over your quirk is nothing short of breathtaking. However, young Bakugo," All Might looked at the blonde boy, who was staring fixedly at the floor. "Your attack at the end was rash. In a real scenario, you could have killed the hostages, your partner, and yourself. You let your personal vendetta cloud your judgment as a villain. You must learn to control your temper." Katsuki didn't scream. He didn't argue. He just ground his teeth together so hard they audibly cracked, a single vein pulsing furiously on his forehead. "I understand." The rest of the battle trials proceeded, but a shadow hung over them. Every student in Class 1A, from the fiery Todoroki to the stoic Tokoemi, measured themselves internally against the terrifying display they had just witnessed. When the school day finally ended, Izuku was packing his bag in the classroom. Most of the students had already left, murmuring excitedly about the day. Deku. Izuku stopped zipping his bag and looked up. Katsuki stood in the doorway of the classroom. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across the floor, but Izuku's shadow remained perfectly still, sensing the lack of immediate threat. Katsuki looked exhausted. The arrogance that usually radiated from him was stripped away, leaving only raw, burning intensity. I lost, Katsuki said, his voice ragged. It was the first time Izuku had ever heard the boy admit defeat out loud. I went all out, and you didn't even break a sweat. You pinned 4 eyes on a different floor while looking me dead in the eye. Izuku stood up, grabbing his bag. Kaken, shut up. I'm not done, Katsuki interrupted, taking a step into the room. He raised a trembling hand, pointing a finger directly at Izuku's chest. I thought my explosions were the absolute peak. I thought raw power was all I needed to crush you. But I was wrong. Katsuki's crimson eyes flared, not with hatred, but with a terrifying, unyielding obsession. You're the alpha right now, Deku. You established your hierarchy today. Everyone in this damn school knows it. Katsuki lowered his hand, his hands curling into tight fists. But I refuse to be a background character in your story. I'm going to rip my way up the food chain. I'm going to train until my sweat runs dry. I'm going to learn strategy. And one day, I am going to tear your pack apart, and I am going to beat you. Izuku stared at his childhood friend. He saw the fire in Katsuki's eyes, a fire that the Alpha Hao couldn't extinguish. It was the fire of a true rival. Izuku smiled, his pointed teeth glinting in the dying sunlight. The air around him grew warm, the Alpha aura resonating with Katsuki's challenge, accepting it fully. I'll be waiting at the top, Kaken, Izuku replied softly. Don't take too long. Katsuki scoffed, a genuine smirk finally breaking through his scowl. He turned on his heel and walked out of the classroom, slamming the door shut behind him. Izuku stood alone in the quiet room. He looked down at his shadow. 2 small, kinetic pups popped their heads out, wagging their ethereal tails happily. Izuku reached down and patted them both, feeling the steady, thrumming heartbeat of his unstoppable legion. The hierarchy was established. The Alpha had taken his throne in Class 1A. But Izuku knew the real challenges were yet to come. The world outside UA was full of real villains, real threats, and shadows much darker than his own. He slung his bag over his shoulder, his eyes glowing faintly green in the dim light. Come on, Pack. Let's go home. We have a lot of training to do,